Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Excel College Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Chambers.
And I'm Isaiah Schmidt.
And today we're joined by the one and only Andrew Haak, aka Andrew number 2.
I don't know how I
Just
feel
kidding.
about that.
You can be Andrew number 1. Welcome.
No, it's okay. I'll just be Andrew Haak if that's easier.
Yeah, that's fine.
Actually, our neighbors at the last conference ended up referring to you as Andrew too.
They did, actually.
literally
Yeah,
did.
well, they said Andy too at first. And I was like,
Ooh.
And he's all
I was
about
like,
Andy.
nope, we're not going to do that.
Love it.
So, yeah, dude, welcome on.
Thank you. It's good to be
Have
here.
we had you on the podcast before? We had you on a podcast before.
We haven't. We haven't
No.
actually.
This
is your first podcast?
Yeah,
Well, first Excel podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. What was your other podcast?
Abnormal Tribe.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, the World Race podcast.
Yeah.
You guys were on. Yep.
I was Andrew number 2 on that.
Yes, you
So
were.
that was like-
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Episode number 3 or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing.
A while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's good to be on.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Today we're talking about the mathematics module.
Mm-hmm.
So just for everybody that's joining us new, or if you've been with us before, just a reminder. So what we're actually doing with our podcast is we're alternating between modules that we're walking through because we're following the 2.5 year student journey.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in the core. We're in our core curriculum right now. So we've already done theology, then we did philosophy, and now we're in mathematics.
Yep.
Then our next module is physics after spring break.
Mm-hmm.
And so today we're going to be talking about mathematics. We had Dion on last week.
Yeah.
He just came and told a bunch of stories, which we love having Dion on.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
After spring break, we'll have somebody that either went to Columbia
Oh, great.
to serve at Medellin or to Crisis Relief on, just to talk about how that was.
That's amazing.
Nice.
So, but yeah, so we're alternating between module podcast and just student life podcast. And today's module podcast.
There we go.
Awesome.
Yeah. Do you want to, so since you're the expert at the curriculum, 4 times you've been
By
through?
no means. This is technically, I guess, my third time.
Third
Probably.
time.
Third
Okay.
time all the
Wow.
way through.
Yeah.
I've done a couple parts, a handful more.
Nice.
Yeah.
Where does mathematics fit into this whole thing? Can you tee us off?
Yeah. So mathematics is this strange discipline. Obviously, we've come from theology and philosophy, these kind of more transcendent subjects, more ethereal, more up here, as you could just say, the dimensions of up here and down here. The transcendent subjects, more philosophical in nature, for sure. And then math is this weird bridge that builds between the transcendent and the immanent. We talk about, throughout the module, we talked about obviously applied mathematics and then this idea of pure mathematics too, where it's, and even just historically speaking, where math has gone from a society that really emphasizes the pure and they actually don't see it as very applied, and which is kind of hard for us to imagine, math not having application. Real world application to solve problems, which we see math as like a problem solving tool quite easily. We don't have to stretch our minds to think that. But that's not always been the case. We travel along with mathematics and just follow it through history, and we see societies that, they love the pure mathematics, and they actually, even from like a religious perspective, they see math as having these perfect forms, like actually resembling much more religion than a scientific discipline.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we follow the journey, but where we're at now is balancing these two disciplines of applied mathematics as a problem-solving tool, but then also pure mathematics that helps us interpret the universe and gives us direction and even it's just a discipline for our minds, a way to know reality in a way that we can't know otherwise, a way of knowing reality that's reserved specifically for the mathematician. It's an amazing module. The more times I go through, the more obviously you uncover.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but so now we're stepping into physics next, which is all about studying matter. So the physics module is all about, okay, we live in a material world, like immaterial and material, but let's now start to ask the question, how do I read the material world? We introduce this idea a lot of like the book of God's works versus the book of God's word. The book of God's word maybe being the Bible or like inspired text. And then the book of God's works is everything he's done, everything he's made. So if it's a book, we should learn how to read that book. And that's what the physics module is all about. How do we read his book, which is matter? How do we read matter?
I think I just had this realization that is math like the hinge between like the material and immaterial a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a good way to put
interesting.
it.
Huh. That's cool.
Yeah. It's where the finite and the infinite meet. They touch.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's like we can how can a finite thing know an infinite thing? Well, mathematics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We interact with it all day.
Which I think the distinction, like you were saying, of the applied and pure is a
Yeah.
pretty big one.
Yeah.
Especially going into the module, it's just like there's a lot of, like for me, I understood that math had more to do than just like very applicable things. There's more theoretical math, but I think it's just so elusive for people that are not, I don't know, maybe brilliant or specifically geared to just think in that certain way.
Yeah.
That for me, I didn't ever really consider it for very long, and it really brought into the light just being like, okay, it's real, and there's things that aren't real, and it's like when they actually touch together, I don't have to understand how to compute it to really understand that it matters and the significance of it. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest paradigm shifts. Is I don't have to understand how to work out these beautiful and grand and the most complex and difficult equations,
Right.
or be some quantum physicist, but I can understand how God uses math as part of creation to reveal parts of himself that no one else really gets access to.
Oh, wow.
So it was profound.
That's cool.
I thought math was definitely a godless place. Cried over it many times in my life, but this was actually the first time genuinely that like I cried over math for a good reason.
Wow. Okay. Talk to me a little bit more about that, because students coming in are always like, I hate math. I mean, not everyone, but some are like, I love math. I can't wait to get into algebra and calculus. And we're like, well, we're not going to do that. And then some are like, I hate math. I don't want to get in it. And we're like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Why do we do, like you said, like versus doing computation, we're more talking about the meaning and the history of it. Why do we do that?
Yeah. Well, I would just say that really looking at it, knowing the philosophy and history of math gives something significance and value, even if I'm not the one wielding it. Really, like with anything, you know, we can respect and greatly admire astronauts by watching a documentary about space and all the training they go through and all those other things. But we ourselves might not ever be equipped or able to go into space. So for me, being able to look at these different ways that math can like really add, I know one of the first week was like math adds a vitality to our worship.
Yeah, that was cool.
So just like, I've never considered that really, because math is typically, it felt like a pretty dry place, because the main function I think that I've encountered in the educational system with math was just solving problems. If you know how to solve problems that are in front of you with a math that you already know, math has fulfilled its complete purpose. And here it blew up that whole paradigm that it's like, oh man, math goes way farther.
Wow.
And you don't have to be Albert Einstein to be able to get there.
Wow.
So that alone, just understanding the origin of it, I didn't realize the significance of that. But in this module, just spending time understanding some of the history of like the number 0. That wasn't a number before. It was hardly an idea in like a functional way. Just as an example. And it just, it blossoms out from there. Like Davis was saying, he's comparing it like to a prism. And you might shine a simple ray of light that's the most ordinary thing any person in the history of mankind probably could see. It's this thing that comes up every day, almost nearly every day. It comes up every day, whether you can see it or not, right? Clouds, but it takes a prism of mathematics, let's say, and you hold it up. And when you look at that one ray of light and it hits it, it just explodes, and you can see this array of different things that were a part of it before that you couldn't before. So understanding God through this prism of mathematics expands this thing about his nature that just I had never considered. So each of these parts of mathematics that become these avenues that you can go down and understand more about him, more about our purpose, more about creation.
Wow.
All that.
All from 2 + 2 = 4.
I know.
Yeah.
I
Isn't
know.
that crazy?
Yeah.
Okay, so we normally, when we do our modules, we normally have like questions of the week, like questions of the module. But with math, it's a little different. So I guess, one of you want to explain like what's the difference, how we're doing it in math versus how we normally do it? And then flow wise for the podcast today, I guess we can still go like week by week, but what's the kind of different format that we're working with here?
Yeah. It's a little different because some of the weeks take an entire school of thought and kind of hold that up as a lens of like, let's understand this ism or this common assumption about it, and you can kind of break it down. With math, there's a few dimensions to it because we're walking with an assumption of philosophy and theology, whereas before it was like all right, let's remove all assumptions we can from the table and look at this one thing. And then it's like, okay, are there really any underlying assumptions required to really make this statement? So math is a further, like, I don't know, kind of way of putting that, but we're assuming some things about theology and philosophy. And that's kind of like directly stated in each week. So it's like, all right, we get it. We're now making more clear assumptions.
Gotcha.
Ones that we find are well-founded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we're going to look at this topic of math.
Okay.
And because if I'm going to say that math, like for the first week, adds a vitality or life, a real vitality to my worship and devotion, that means that there's something to be worshipped that I'm assuming, right?
Okay.
A very valid assertion and one that our college likely has, you know what I mean? Like it's one thing that's okay, we're going to continue to move forward based on those. So it moves forward in kind of a more expanded upon like the other end of the prism kind of way.
Yeah. And it's too the 4 weeks, typically we'll have a question of the week or an answer of the week or a theme of the week. And then with math, it's almost these two statements with each week where math champions something and then it challenges something. Like that's kind of the format that we go with. It champions this and it challenges this. Even just start with week 1. The abstract nature of math. Do you remember you just took the test yesterday?
The assumption? Yeah. It challenges atheism as a metaphysical option.
And what would you say week 1 it champions what?
It just challenges like the existence of God, really. Like
champions it.
Yeah, it champions
okay,
that.
okay.
So it challenges this belief that there cannot be a God, like that there is an existence beyond us. It's where it touches, and it's like, okay, I can see just by the presence of math, all of math assumes that there is a entity much larger than us, and we are barely even getting at it in our most theoretical things is where somehow our greatest breakthroughs come from.
Yeah.
Whereas the other way around, if it's only about down here, then I can only go so far with my mathematics that's here on the earth. But Einstein and these other brilliant people are using pure mathematics. So it's just so theoretical and out there based on these other ideas. But that's how we've discovered things about gravity, relativity. Like just throughout time, those are the biggest breakthrough, Newton and Einstein kind of things.
Okay, I need to camp there for a second.
Okay.
Is this where we talked about math is not neutral? Was that the same week?
Week 1, yeah.
Okay, so we're making the claim that math challenges atheism as a viable worldview. Because where are we making that claim? Like, who do we read? What were some of the, like, that's a pretty, I would say, because when I think of mathematicians and I think of math, I think of like the dude coding in his basement that's like, no, God's not real. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember we read Poythress. A lot of these readings are more contemporary, I think, for the math module. They're not so much the ancients, so much, especially the ones on neutrality. We read Poythress and I think Clauser. They're much more 20th century mathematicians that are Christians that are just making the claim that there's philosophical assumptions built into math, that if you want a math that works, essentially a math that functions and doesn't contradict itself, then there needs to be certain like philosophical foundations for it to actually work. And one of those is that there's a plurality, a unity, and then a relationality to it. And then we relate that back to Francis Schaeffer's like metaphysical necessity, where like the base level of all reality is it's relational, it's unified, and it's diverse. So it's those three parts where it can't all be one, like radical monism. Davis talks about this. It can't all be one, because if it's all one, then 2 + 2 equals 1, or 1 + 1 = 1. It's all one. Yeah. Like you can't have an addition, or you can't have a difference. You can't have a difference. And if it's radical pluralism, then it's like you can't have a unity. You can't have things come together into a new thing. Two things making a new.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna like maybe push us a little bit like into like more layman's terms here, because I wasn't here for this week.
No,
so I hear like pluralism, monism, and I'm like, but
so
how does
many
math
isms
challenge
out there.
atheism? Like how does math say to me like how does math make me go, wow, there has to be this divine being behind all this?
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at a math problem, let's take the most complex. 1 + 1 = 2. You know?
Yeah.
For me, we even took a time in class that was just written on the board, and we just looked at it. It's like
and giggled for hours like that.
What does this mean?
Yeah.
Like, what do you just observe? And after spending the last like 2 modules in theology and philosophy, it's like, okay, all right, let's bring those 2 lenses to look at this with, and it's like, all right, I do see that there has to be a balance. There has to be an equal sign is there, which means that if this is a working math equation, then 1 + 1 has to equal 2, or it doesn't equal 2. So it's like it either is or it isn't. That means there's an absolute.
Okay.
So that challenges the whole idea that truth can be this changing thing. It's like actually that is either it does equal that or it doesn't equal that. So math equations and formulas like are dependent on that alone. But that requires that there's 2 different things. And there's this relationship. So one is like the other one, but they're different. And they're related to each other through the plus sign.
Okay.
And it's like just like the very fabric of reality itself. Like it requires that. So it's interesting because 1 + 1 = 2 is a representation of these ideas that are so core to reality, which we talked about in the theology and then later in the philosophy, that was hard to say, module, that we're able to actually see, okay, like if that's required for things to exist, then we trace that all the way back to that requires there be a being outside of what we are ourselves. Does that make any sense?
Okay, so how do you get there? So if 1 + 1 = 2, or if that absolute is required, then it requires that there's a being outside of ourselves. How do we make that connection? I guess
throughout the entire theology and philosophy module.
Oh, okay.
But I will say that metaphysically, things existing, like there's the metaphysical option that we don't have God or that we're it. There's a lot of reasons why we could go all the way back to like the first person, the first mover. There has to be a first mover if we're going to trace back like this is moving now. Then we can trace it back that was caused by this, that was caused by this. It has to go back to the beginning. And it pulls it back to this being that has to be the first mover, first causer. So there's different elements of this existence of God, not necessarily saying what he's like. Those are other things that we can infer, but everything in existence kind of is hinged upon this requirement that math is also based upon. And math, the rules of math assume all of those things existing as this very fabric of how reality is structured in order to exist. There has to be plurality. There's not everything is one because has to be difference for things to exist, relationship, and so on. Right. So does that make sense? It's kind of confusing.
So essentially, like the fact that math in itself exists communicates that there is like this coherence and order and maybe even like logic to the universe. Is that what I'm catching?
No, that's good. That's also good. Yeah.
So I see. So like you could say math is like the language of the universe to some extent.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, that's good.
Or a language of the universe.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, there's people that I would say that would agree with that. In some of the readings, some of the people definitely did say that they believe that. And even as far back as the Quadrivium, reading portions of that, just talking about things with mathematics relationship to even language, like the existence of language and communication.
Yeah.
And even its existence in music, which I thought was especially
math
beautiful.
And music?
Yeah. Yeah. So the three, like language, math, and music are really impossible to fully separate, like the existence of them to communicate something. So to even have distinction in the words that I'm saying to you in English, if you didn't speak English, you might not know that there's a break between each of my words because I'm not talking with a space each time. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, I've traveled around, and that's always one of the hardest parts, especially Spanish, because if you don't know where the word ends,
That's funny.
or even more like Hindi or other languages that are just so many syllables too, it's even harder. But to understand the distinction between the two, there has to be a separation, or there's no understanding.
I see.
In music, you have to know what notes even harmonize with each other, which is a whole nother thing. But it talks about the relationship of time, space, and all these things, these elements that are foundational for math. So, and those are how they relate in our reality. And just observing those things in pure mathematics is able to take all of these rules of how the universe is working. And from there, it's like we actually require a first mover. We require the greatest conceivable being, because there's different beings that are in authority over different things, and things that I can't control. I can't control that 1 + 1 = 2.
Right.
And even if I want to try to control it, I might just look ridiculous if I try to pretend it means something else. Because if you just look at the universe and I put 1 rock on the table, and I add 1 rock on the table, there are 2 rocks on the table. And just that whole relationship with that is this reality that we, in seeking wisdom, in the whole module, like the philosophy module, has these questions of life we're trying to answer. And there's some that we're making assumptions about, that we have this metaphysical assumption we're making that this is real. This is a very real thing, and I'm trying to align myself with realizing that. So if I recognize that the sun comes up at this time of day, and I have energy at that time of day, there's wisdom in waking up at that time of day, and aligning myself with reality. So math is a really theoretical, but somehow very easily and quickly applicable way to do that, if that makes sense. So it's drawing out the philosophy and the theological assumptions and implications, what we champion and challenge in mathematics. So so it's not as much computational. I mean, there are elements of that, and some really fun activities we did that were really cool. To, like, this is how the people got to different thoughts. But understanding these core truths that can be found in math.
I love how you related, like, when with the quadrivium, like math and music. And like, but also like you need that separation, and you actually need to be able to like put coherence to things, because it immediately took. So I've got a 2-year-old, Evan, and his Mimi brought him a guitar this week when she was watching him, and so he would just walk up to us and just be like, bah, 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 and strumming that. And like, there's no, he's 2, so like, there's no like, place your fingers here and like do 2 notes apart from each other in this way, or like put the chord strings together this way. It's just bah, bah. It sounds horrible, but like, he's 2 years old, so it's like super cute, but it's like, and so then of course I can't play instruments either, so I'm just like, bah, bah, and like, making sounds, Evan, and his mom's like, that's awful, like, get out.
Oh, that's so
whereas like, if you have someone that's actually skilled at guitar and that can learn like music theory, which I think includes a lot of like math and numbers, and then like it actually puts into something beautiful. All that to say, it feels like there's an actual reality to and objectivity to like, this song is beautiful and this one is not. Like my it's not beautiful versus like someone that actually calculates that out. And uses like, if I put the chord here and if I play this chord here, and organizes it, which feels like math, even though it's not necessarily numbers related. Is that, I don't know.
Well, getting into the beauty of it all. That's
beauty. I was just thinking of that.
Tread lightly.
Okay.
I mean, I know that there's, when it comes to art, and especially when you think mathematically, where it's like, oh, there's a formula to what's good art. Like, there's definitely elements of that which I agree with, where I'm like, there is something to like this building dissonance that resolves, and you feel this emotion. But then there's also people that have like, I don't know, there's the element of individual taste, where
for sure,
like Charity was like, Andrew, that doesn't sound very good. But your mom might be like, Andrew, that's wonderful.
My mom was like, I love you, but no.
I was thinking earlier about what you were saying, and just how I was trying to relate it to the next module, physics. The next module is all about reading matter, and mathematics is all about, which is a material, physical thing. And I was like, I just had this realization almost that math is all about reading immaterial. So physics is all about reading matter in the physical, tangible. And math is all about reading the intangible, the abstract that exists. Like 2 is real, but it's not a physical thing that I can hold. I can't hold the idea of 2. It's an abstract
like
thing.
Davis would say, give me some 2.
Yep, exactly.
Bring me a bucket of 2.
Which you said earlier. Like, here's 2 coffee mugs, but that's just representing the idea of 2. It's an intangible. And it's like, we need to learn how to read the material world as much as we need to learn how to read the immaterial world.
Yeah.
Because the immaterial world can help us influence and steward and take the material world somewhere. Yeah.
Because 2 is very real.
Yeah.
But go find me some 2.
Yeah.
I challenge anyone watching this podcast to find me some 2. Isaiah will give you $20,000.
And I'll give you 2.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying. So like if I'm building a bridge, like the immaterial 2 really matters.
That's good.
Like it's a real, like it really influences the way I put my materials together, the way I calculate where they should be at. But you still can't find me some 2.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I think even for me by nature, like I said, going into math, it was like I want to just know how would it apply. Explain that to me. How does it apply? What's the most simple layman's terms?
Yeah.
But if it's immaterial, it's very difficult to sometimes make it so simple. You can through allegory, but even doing so, you're talking about immaterial using material.
Yeah.
So it's a tendency to want for all of us to pull it down into a very tangible thing like that. And I think that's some of the beauty behind mathematicians' work, pure mathematicians, is how hypothetical so much of it is.
Yeah.
That it's almost like reality they can view as like an abstract thing. Like really just math has this abstract nature that is pulled out that is so profound. And even for me, even in my examples to you, I'm realizing I'm like everything. I was making these immediate applications on wisdom and application. But I think the beauty though, what you had said, I think is such a cool part of it. And even understanding in one of the readings, Archimedes is talking to the king after this whole defeat happened in this Battle of Troy and whatnot. And he's talking to the king about math. And I found it so profound because he was talking about what if the Romans get a hold of our math? And he was saying the Romans are like so practical, it'll die. It won't go very far because they're after it for only its function. And I was like, whoa. And as he talked about that, he said that he compared it actually to Helen of Troy. He said, math is just like your daughter. He said, if you approach it for the sake of its beauty, you will understand its secrets and its mysteries. But if you understand it only for its function, it will end. And that blew my mind. That gave me chills, man, because it's something that if you approach it for the sake of it just being beautiful, that's when the lid gets taken off, that I'm not just solving problems. And once I can memorize all the rules and all the problems to solve, then I've hit the end of math. And math's purpose is far bigger than that. That was probably one of the biggest revelations in the whole module. And as we dove into beauty, that was actually really what enraptured me more than anything. So, and it's really hard to not make it physical and about physics, but that's what we're moving into next. So it's a natural progression for sure in the modules. So, yeah.
Just a small thing that comes to mind. I remember when my class, when I was in the Corps, we went to the art trip in Italy. One of our tour guides, she just made a point to say, she was like, you can see, obviously these statues don't have arms. These statues don't have arms. These statues don't have arms. And she's like, they're Roman. And she's like, you want to know a good characteristic of a Greek statue? It has arms. And we were all like, what? What? And she's like, so the Greeks had this understanding of phi, the golden rectangular, the golden ratio, which is not only aesthetically pleasing, like it's beautiful to look at, and it's so like hardwired into the universe. It's part of the code of the universe. It's also beautiful and it works.
I love that
and
analogy.
It's functional.
That's such a good analogy.
And she's like, it's functional, it's beautiful, it's all these things, but it's actually a proportion that if you only know what it looks like, oh, I'm going to draw a golden rectangle, not using math, just trying my best, which is what the Romans essentially were doing because they didn't have the math for it.
Whoa.
The Greeks could do it, and they could build statues with arms unsupported, and thousands of years later, they're still there. The Romans did it, but
they built statues. They just broke the arms.
Yeah, the Romans' arms would fall off.
I didn't catch that part
because they didn't have the proportion right. They didn't know the proportions of the human body.
Whoa,
yeah,
that is crazy.
The human body is built around this proportion of 5.
You are wonderfully made. Oh, interesting.
It's
that
cool.
is
so cool.
That is crazy.
So they inherited the Greek tradition, but they didn't inherit the appreciation for like what made the Greek tradition.
That is crazy.
The beauty. Oh, that's good. Yeah. That's such a good analogy.
It's essentially like doing mathematics is it's a discovery and not it's like a discovery process, not a creating process, right? Because you're like discovering what's there and you're like going deeper and deeper. It's like searching for gold versus like trying to make gold in your oven. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there's a difference there.
But it is creating at the same, and that's a tension that we take all the way through the module where we ask the question, was math made or discovered?
Right, yeah.
Did humans invent mathematics? or is mathematics something God invented and we made? And I saw a bunch of people come to this realization where they're like, oh, the curriculum's trying to get me to realize that God made it and we found it. So they swing from, oh, wow, this is a great realization. And then I think for me, it's like, well, okay, it's okay to swing there, but then actually go back and realize, wow, no, actually humans have advanced this thing so much. You could even say created in a lot of elements. And there's this reading, Josephson, like we read in week 3, where he just says, he's quoting another mathematician. I don't remember who he's quoting, but he just says, God gave man positive integers. Or no, he said, God gave positive integers. The rest is the work of man.
Yeah.
And I was just like, ooh.
Oh, interesting.
So it's this like co-creating thing where God gave us all the tools that we ever needed. And like, but who came up with the formula for finding the force of gravity? Humans. Humans did. Yeah. Like we invented the formula. We came up with the formula.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Huh.
Yeah. I think if anything, it's not as much glory be to only mankind.
Yeah.
But rather mankind accomplishing these things as the image of God continually brings him glory. And it actually helps us steward. That's something that hit me yesterday, was that it makes us the best stewards of our environment with these tools. Like I was even walking around our campus last night and just like walking, and I'm just like looking at the parking lot and it's like etched into the hillside. And I'm thinking, I'm like, man, how much manpower would that take to move that much dirt? And I was just like, how beautiful it is that mankind has made these discoveries that led to engines and machines and these big earth movers. They can make quick and easy work of that, and to be better stewards of what we have, and where we can move water from this place to that, but we understand how this affects the other. And it's like it all moves outward into like all these different areas of life, and it's just so beautiful that math is a really foundational piece of that. Even the communication we have, like radio waves, that was found by a mathematician. And even understanding that people being paid to be pure mathematicians, not just engineers, was actually where some of our biggest scientific discovery came through in the last like 200 years.
We talked about that because it's like people that were doing math just for the sake of math actually made the greatest discoveries, but people that were trying to apply something usually found nothing. That is so fascinating. It is. So fascinating. Okay, do you have examples of that offhand?
Well, Bell Laboratories, I think it was one of the first that in one of the readings we covered, he had an exhaustive list. I believe it was 1888 was like one of the first hired. I'm not sure if that was the States or not alone. But after that, he predicted this exponential growth because of the fruit that came from just studying math for its beauty, with brilliant people able to just spend all their time in there doing that, discovering different things like radio waves. I remember radio waves is one of them. But it just kept going out from there. But it was just so incredible, the different discoveries that all came up through it.
That is crazy. That's really crazy.
Can I pose a question?
Yeah.
So like you guys were talking about being like math, studying it just for the beauty, and then you find fruit of it. How does that apply to faith? So like spiritual discipline.
Oh, interesting.
Does it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so like the one reading I was there for was I can't remember the lady's name, but she essentially talked about.
Dude, you were gone for class. You were slacking hardcore.
Slacking.
What's going on, man? Maybe tell the listeners what happened.
I'll just leave it there. No, kidding. We had our baby Friday, by the way.
Yes.
Yes.
Insert sound of crowd applauding.
It's a long, traumatic, drawn-out thing. But we had our baby Friday. Came home today.
Come on.
Yes.
Let's go.
Congrats.
He was up all night last night. So glad he's here. But we're so glad he's here.
I'm proud of you, man.
Wow.
So, who'd you say the lady was?
Is it Rosemary Schmalz? Rosemary Schmalz.
And she gave this like analogy of, or she was talking about like math adds vitality to our worship. And she gave this analogy of like a student and their professor in Poland writing like f of x equals y. Or f of y equals x, something like that, on the napkin in Poland, and just sitting there for hours and staring at it and like laughing and like giggling and just having this really like spiritual experience. And like, and I was like, are they on shrooms? Like, what are they doing? But like, it's like, no, they're actually having this like crazy, like, they're actually like just staring at this equation for hours. And just, I don't know if discovering or meditating on or like capturing so much significance that for me was just like the bane of my existence in high school. But they're like really like loving it. And I feel like with the faith question. It's like Dr. Bob, actually, when he comes, Dr. Bob Nichols, will try to interview him next time. But
Oh yeah.
he talks about like if you find there's a verse in scripture where it says like it's the glory of God to hide a thing and it's the glory of kings to search it out. And but it takes like that faith to actually be willing to go and like search for the things that God's like hidden. And it's like this picture of like you're just digging for gold and like so that's kind of what I think about. It's like like Newton with gravity. It's like, okay, this I know that there's this incredible like being that's behind this. Like let's discover like what he's made and why he's made it. That's what I think about that.
Yeah. I remember her comparing it to like a crystal ball of sorts, the symbol of it as just like a placeholder of representation, how elegant it was, that it was just like the prism, something so simple that could expand and explode into all these colors and show you something more of it. And I thought it was so interesting how people would call a math equation elegant.
Yeah.
I was very curious as to why. But seeing that, and I'm like, I think about that for me. Sometimes I've done that with like a scripture. Like I've just sat and just read it over and over again, or just had it in front of me and just wrote it out like a sticky note and just sat with it. And the Lord's just continually bringing up like new thoughts, like what about this? What about that? And I think it's just so beautiful that math just so closely looks at the structure and the nature of the world always around us and ourselves, the way we think, and that God just so well equipped our minds in his image to be able to observe these things through science, physics, everything. It's so beautiful. Like math is beautiful. That's groundbreaking for me.
That is,
person.
yeah.
It was always just so hard and painful. And I think even Shmuel's talking about that with the disciplines.
Yeah.
Like that the difficult, laborious, dry hours of maybe just writing down that one thing, staring at it and be like, right, this is terrible.
But it starts with a belief that this is worth it. And it starts with like even a trust that it's going to take you somewhere.
Yeah.
And then the disciplines follow. Like a commitment to it first and then disciplines follow.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And even those disciplines yielding in faith, like the exact type of revelations and blessings, really.
Yeah.
They even the word serendipity, I just didn't really ever think about it before. I thought it just meant happy.
What does serendipity mean?
Right. But in this module, they use the word serendipity like as its closest meaning. A best example is this one mathematician who's been working on this equation for months and months, even years, really thinking about this idea. And one day when he's not at work, when he's not in the midst of calculating, he's getting on the bus. And the moment he steps on the bus, boom, this revelation hits. And he understands it. Or he's out for a walk. It's just these completely unrelated things. And it's just like the revelation comes. And I think it's just so like God. It's almost playful. He almost like puts it out there like, here's this revelation about this thing you've been working on. It's not only about the labor. And isn't that just like God? Where it's like almost in this Shabbat type moment that he brings revelation, that it's not only about my labor, it's also about when I've stopped from my labors, that he can offer those revelations that add to it, and it adds vitality to my worship even more in how I take care of things.
That analogy, when I read that, spoke to me so much, because when I was at G42 in Spain, I used to just walk around all day like kind of praying and like just being, and then when I like wasn't, I would just like be doing the dishes in the kitchen. I felt like God would like drop something into my heart that like and speak. And I found like the work that I was doing was actually like tilling the soil of my heart to be able to receive.
That's awesome.
And then it would come later, like when it was ready for planting. You know what I'm saying? But I wasn't tilling at the time anymore. It was just sitting there ready.
That's good.
And it was the same thing. But okay, here's the connection. So at first I was like, that's weird, because that was like a really spiritual thing for me. And this dude had it in math. So like, what does that say about this? But if that's like the language of the universe, and there's like this actual reality that like is. I don't.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I don't know how to put words to that, but
yeah, it's like there's a dimension of experience to God that's reserved for the mathematician, and there's a dimension of knowledge of God that only the mathematician will get to experience. And it's like, I don't want to become, and I don't think I will ever become a serious like mathematician, but I'm starting to experience it. I'm starting to see him as a mathematician sees him. And it's like, that's the purpose of the math module, is just to capture a glimpse of like, how can we see him through math? Like that prism analogy. How can I just capture one more ray of light that I hadn't yet seen before? Because I don't want to miss out. I actually want to capture all of them, every ray of light, like that I can possibly see. Because if he's the basis of all reality, he's what we would call ultimate reality.
Yeah.
Then there's so many different ways, as many as you can possibly imagine, to see him and experience him.
Yeah.
And it's like that's the purpose of every module.
Yeah.
There's a way of knowing him only for the biologist.
Yeah.
And it's
So
like
good.
we'll step into that next. There's a way reserved for experiencing him only as a biologist would. And I won't become, I'm not an expert, but I want to just taste a little bit. And then see what I really, really like, and then I can put all my efforts or put more efforts towards that discipline.
That's amazing. I think that's probably a good place to stop for the day. We just have a few minutes left. I think we should end the podcast by writing E = MC squared on this table, and everyone just staring at it with us for the next hour and a half.
Yeah.
Just
hour
kidding.
and a half. I think if we don't know what that means, it won't do anything for us.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Well, the people
I think that brings up a really good point. We had a great meditation to end off our whole entire math module. That's actually so good. I love how God uses jokes sometimes to bring the perfect thing to the surface. I love it. But meaning or meaningful.
Yeah.
Like what makes something meaningful? That was kind of our transition out of the math into physics. And just understanding what the meaning is in something is probably one of the most significant and valuable things. And like, I know we had this great meditation and conversation just really on like what makes something meaningful. And to be able to understand an equation, if each of those things has meaning, then it is actually a prism in which we can understand more. So by using theology, understanding reality, by understanding the philosophy module, going in everything from knowledge to reality to like what is our entire purpose fulfilled as humanity, as me in vocation, as like everything, using those lenses, we're able to look with that level of meaning. Like when God is the one attributing true meaning and purpose to each thing that he is ordained into its existence and its fulfillment of its purpose.
Yeah.
Then we can look at something like just a simple math equation. If I am understanding that meaning, or even if I'm not studying a mystery like scientific discovery, that can be something that brings it about. So for some of us, it's how we look at people. Like for me, I see people and the Lord just shows me things about them. He puts things in my heart, inclinations, because that's just kind of a huge piece of my purpose, my telos, my vocation, is being able to love people just as he loves them and see them in a specific way to call out the better things in them. So I think understanding meaning overall is probably one of the most significant and helpful things to use going forward with these lenses as we look at the future modules. So it was a really beautiful way to end the module.
That's amazing. Well, cool. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Excel College Podcast. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a total blast.
Yeah.